offering online courses, a mentor program, webinars, workshops, and remote coaching for all things confirmation. And today I'm talking to my good friend Lara Joseph of the Animal Behavior Center. Look at the Animal Behavior Center. So I want to talk a little bit first about how I got to know Lara and what the Animal Behavior Center is. But first, let's have a little introduction from Lara tell us about the Animal Behavior Center.
Okay. Where do I begin? Well, I always tell people, we're an international educational center where we teach people all over the world how to empower the lives of animals and the people that work with them. And we do that through our live streaming services. I know live streaming is popular now. We've been doing live streaming our services for at least 5 years. So the Animal Behavior Center it was an idea I had years ago, and ABC, antecedent behavior consequence, that was all on purpose.
I know, that's why I wanted to ask you, what made you come up with that name? I mean, I know the answer, but I want to hear you share it for everybody else.
Well, because I like to tell people how applied behavior analysis works with animals, and I particularly love working with exotics. I could have easily, and I got into this field because I got an animal I knew absolutely nothing about, and that was a parrot. And so that's how it all started. And then I started thinking, I was like, I do not understand this animal. What is going on?
And that was Rico, right?
Rico. Sorry. Yep. So then I started.
Oh, I know more about your animals than you do.
You might.
Yeah. Okay, so you got Rico. You didn't know anything about birds.
Didn't know anything about birds. I was actually barrel racing horses at the time when I got Rico. And so I was searching for science-based information on behavior in training of parrots in particular, and I found next to nothing. A lot of it was insinuation, so then I started searching and doing workshops, and I found some workshops, and I started traveling all over the United States just because I wanted to do better with my bird. Started taking different workshops, was introduced to applied behavior analysis, and I was like, here's the science. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up adopting another bird. It was an 8-year-old bird. That's Rocky. And it was professionally advised that he be put to sleep for his behavior issues. And I knew enough to say, this bird wasn't born or hatched this way. This is learned behavior. I just didn't understand what learned behavior was at the time. So that's when I went back to school and started taking master level classes in applied behavior analysis.
And so we'll come back. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Nope. I was just going to say that's, Rocky was labeled as aggressive, should be euthanized. And I started applying the behavior analysis, and I got it worked.
That was exactly what I was going to ask you. Like, what were the behaviors he was doing that was so concerning in the home he was in?
Well, he was abandoned in the home he was in, left behind. The owner sold the house and left him in the cage, and the mother found him and just said, this bird is very mean, aggressive, get him out of here. So he would run after you, bite, lunge, chase you up, down flights of stairs. Well, this is what he was doing to me. I didn't know what he was as a former owner. Screaming excessively, like once every 3 seconds for probably 2 to 3 hours on end.
Wow. So that is definitely one of the biggest issues I hear about birds is the screaming. So he had been doing all that. Did he end up going to a rescue or being relinquished to a vet or something, and then you were able to have a shot at him?
Yeah, he was at a rescue, and I was doing behavior work at a vet clinic, and that's when I saw him. He came in for a vet appointment, and I was very attracted to the cockatoos, especially the Moluccans, but I knew enough at that point that there were so many that were in rescues, and I was just like, let's just wait. And I just kept putting off because I knew I was in over my head.
Yeah.
You know, I purchased Rico and then bought the book on cockatoos and found out there some of them.
That it wasn't a cockatiel.
Yeah, told everybody, hey, I just got a cockatiel. And then, so I did it all backwards. Then I got a book on cockatoos and read that they were some of the most, what do I want to say, high maintenance of the parrots. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
hey, yeah, we're in trouble. Way to do your research, Lara. But if I never made that mistake, I wouldn't be sitting here with you today.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to talk a little bit about how we met. So I had birds, I have birds, and I really was interested in doing, working with birds professionally, but really just getting better with my own birds. So when I had Ivan, my gray, before he passed, we had done a consult with him. I think, hi, Angie. I think that was before I visited you.
Did we
And so,
did we know
what's
each
that?
other? Did we know each other before then?
Yeah, because we had been corresponding and I was reading a lot of your blog posts because at the time that was pretty much all you had. I mean, it was before the live stream. So you just had, I would read your articles and stuff. So then you came out here and you did a workshop. And I think that's the first time we met in person. Then we decided that I would come out and do a day with the trainer. Do you still offer that
Yeah, I do.
ish?
Yeah, I do.
So let me just tell people what that was like. So Laura's day with the trainer was that you could pay a certain amount of money, you could go there and then work with her on basically whatever you wanted to. And this is in Ohio and I'm in California. So I said, I fly there. Can I do 2 days? And we probably spent morning till late at night, both days there. But it was such a good learning experience. For me. And I think the first one, because, I've done a lot of conferences over the years, like a lot of Clicker Expo and APDT and seminars and everything. But I felt like, I needed more hands on. I needed more guidance with my mechanical skills. And of course, I wanted just more help with birds, just working the larger species that I don't have. So I ended up going to Lara's and doing 2 days. And then I went out there to speak. But I also want to say that remember when I came to see you, you were just starting, you were hurrying up and finishing getting the center opened. So you had just moved in there and it was still like not quite ready to go. So that was when I came and that was such a good experience. And that's why we've become such good friends. And I consider you my mentor in parrots and
Wow.
exotics and a lot. So
That was back
um,
when we opened up in 2013, the Animal Behavior Center.
So that would have been quite a few years ago. Oh, wait. Heather said someone told me they wanted to buy a cockatoo. I told her no. Research a lot first. And Diane Garrett said, yes, I've seen Vicky's parrot. She's amazing with them. Oh, thank you, Diane. That's so nice.
Hey, Diane.
So Diane Garrett. So tell me, like, what is it the animal behavior does? Because I know you do the live streaming. I know you have several programs, memberships. I was in the Parrot Project and do want to join that again, which I loved. So what are some of the things that ABC does?
Oh gosh. Our live streaming services are a huge portion of our business. We have like our online live streaming services. They're annual programs, so people can purchase a level one, which is using applied behavior analysis with companion animals. So we have anything in there from dogs, cats, birds, gerbils. We've got a fish trainer in there. Then level two is more focused on the professional trainer, but definitely not limited to. So we're level two, we focus on, it's another annual program. There's a lot of dog trainers in there, zoo trainers, board certified behavior analysts. I'm trying to think, I know I'm missing some, but, or anybody that's interested in getting into the field or wants more intense. There's a lot of rescues in there as well, in both of them. But those are in level two is where you're going to see me training baboons, alligators, giraffe, just to show people that this works across the board. Um, and then some people want more specific. So some people want, like, I don't necessarily need to learn about applied behavior analysis and how it works on all these animals. I just want to know how it works with parrots. So then I have like the parrot project, the pig project,
Yeah.
deaf dog project. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about so you mainly train exotics. You just named some species. So besides parrots and dogs, what are some of the other animals that you've used this this training philosophy and learning theory with?
Sure. And it's not like I love exotics, because I have, there's so many of my friends like yourself that are professional dog trainers using the same applications. I do this with exotics to back up the work that you do, to say, hey, yeah, you may be able to force this animal to do something, but try that with a vulture or a big cat
Yeah.
or an alligator. Um, what was your question? Did I answer it?
Well, it was like, so what are some of the species that you've worked with? So that's, I mean, that's a lot, but I love that you said that, because that was sort of, I always tell people when they ask or when they care, like, if you really want to be a good dog trainer, it's a good idea to train other species, like other animals. And I think that as dog trainers, or as dog owners, a lot of people get into I mean, they're able to take liberties with dogs that you can't with other. I mean, dogs are so domesticated. They are so forgiving. They're so honest. I mean, there's so much about them that people can do some pretty horrendous stuff to them, and the animals will forgive them. And most of the time, people don't get killed by their dogs for doing that. But if you were training a gorilla, or if you were training a giraffe, I mean, you could get killed. So I do you feel like that helps people have like more respect for the animal?
I think it helps them have more respect for the animal and adds more complexity to the situation. I've seen people like intentionally do a training session and then they push the animal in the crate. And I'm like, whoa, if you're really going to apply this, apply it to everyday living. How are you going
Right,
to get that animal in that crate without using force? Because come here, try to force this primate back into its catch cage. You know,
right.
um,
Exactly.
and I always tell people, train. I always train for an accident, because I mean, a lot of the animals I train are, not all of them, but behind cage bars, in enclosures, protective contact, off contact, and then eventually some of them you move to full contact, but a lot of them it's too dangerous, because
Yeah, just to be safe.
when a giraffe starts playing, they play like other giraffes, and you'll find yourself flying across the field.
Right.
So,
So maybe maybe not so good. So you talked about applied behavior analysis, and now that's something that I've just sort of been able to. I've just been sort of sprinkling that terminology into the show dog world, because I don't want to overwhelm people, but it's everything we do. It's like whether you're using, you know, operant condition, if you're peeling it apart and looking for what's fueling the behavior or setting up the behavior, being the antecedent, and what is the consequence, what's fueling and continuing to drive that behavior, like everything can be pulled apart. Any behavior there is, this is how we fix it. So I have a class on that on Show Dog Prep School. No one's ever taken it. It's like basically how to solve any behavior problem there is. Nobody takes it. And I think it's because, I mean, I don't know. I think it might be because it's not um,
you think
enough of a recipe. I
you
mean,
they
you
might
know,
take it beyond that?
they could, yeah, maybe. I think there's a lot of that. And in the dog show world, and I'm sure this is like this in many areas. I know it is in the zoo world. It's been a really hard switch over, but not as much in some of the other dog sports, like in agility. A lot of people use positive reinforcement and focus on that. Um, but in conformation, there's still a little bit of, this is how we've always done it. This dog is going to do this. This is just sort of how we do it. So talk about ABA and sort of what that means?
Sure. Um, Applied behavior analysis. It's using the law, B.F. Skinner's laws of behavior, understanding behavior. And what I find out is a lot of people don't have a thorough understanding of reinforcers. That's why I'm saying maybe they think they're beyond your class, but when
Uh-huh.
people start getting it, you'll see me say, what's the reinforcer? What's the reinforcer behind the desired, undesired behavior? And a lot of people have a hard time picking those apart. And I'll say there's more than just that. There's more than just that. It can be tone of voice, pace, proximity, duration could be a positive punisher, a positive reinforcer. And a lot of people take too big steps in their training plans. And when you're training an exotic, you really got, you know, exotic, undomesticated, you really got to break that down. And you'll see me say, be specific, be specific. Is that all it is? Applied behavior analysis is using B.F. Skinner's laws of behavior. It's also using environmental events to control behavior. We
Hmm.
have to control the animals in our care for their safety, for ours. We control our kids. We have to for learning.
Right.
And then positively reinforce behaviors you want to see maintain or increase. So,
So we have a couple of comments real quick. Let's see. So Heather is on here, and she just answered Angela's question about the Parrot Project. Yes, it's a monthly fee. It's one. Is it 199 a year?
it's an annual fee.
199 a year, right?
Yep, yep, for the year.
Okay, so
And we
that's for
have
the Parrot Project, and it is so worth it. I mean, I really get a lot out of that. So and then she has other, the other membership levels as well. And then Barbara asked, where is that class? The problem solving one is on Show Dog Prep School, Barbara. So you also train dogs, so you have your own dogs. So tell us about your dogs real quick, because you
sure.
have some interesting characters over there.
I always like a challenge. I always say I don't learn from easy. You know, I had a fully
Yeah,
fledged bird here that had his eyes removed, and people are like, how in the world are you going to train it? I was like, oh no, I got to get the bird first. you know,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
so I say that on purpose because we have Quincy, our Rottweiler, who turns 7, I believe, in August, and she is such a fabulous dog. You've met her. Um,
yeah.
she's so in tune with me. Then I have Levi, our deaf bulldog. So he was going to be put down because he was deaf. And I was just like, well, what's wrong with him? Why would you want to put him down? He's like, he's deaf. And I was like, okay. Um, so I was just like, will you just relinquish him to me and I'll find him a home? And then
Hmm.
the people that follow the work I do started getting upset saying, why would you not train this dog and show people how to train deaf dogs? So I have Levi as my first foster fail as far as dogs. And then Snow is my second foster fail. Snow is a deaf and blind border collie that I got at the age of 11 weeks old. And I agreed to bring her here to show people how I was going to train a deaf and blind dog. And she's phenomenal. And I kept her because I fell in love with her, and I thought she would be a great educator.
Yeah, yeah.
So
That's amazing.
how are you going to tell a dog to come to you on cue when it can't see you and it can't hear you? How are you going to tell? I mean, I use a lot of verbal bridges. Good, deaf dog, this is my visual bridge, and Snow, her tactile bridge. So
Yeah.
this means this. This means good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so to make it clear for people, so what Laura's doing is using operant conditioning. So she's figuring out what causes the behavior, that's the antecedent, and then the behavior itself, and then she's reinforcing that behavior. And instead of doing something to scare the animal or hurt the animal, she's reinforcing the behavior she wants. So one thing that's very doggy and that you did that I think is really cool is that Laura had, and maybe this has changed now, but when I was there, and following you, she has not just bird cages, like her birds are in big, like zoo kind of enclosures inside a portion of the training area. By the way, she has a 10,000 square foot greenhouse she bought for her, that was converted into this training center so her birds can fly around. So you had wanted the dogs to learn not to go into the enclosures, and then Laura had just made blue tape X's, and those were targets right outside all the enclosures. So the dogs were allowed to come right there and station there, right, while you go inside, but they're not to be coming in while you clean.
Yeah. What I don't want the dogs to do is walk into one of the parrots enclosure because I'm worried about what the parrots would do to the dogs. So
Right.
what do you want the dogs to do instead? And the pig. We had the pig in
Yeah.
there, and
Well, right. Milo does that. Yeah. Yeah.
still have those X's, and we have stations duct taped to the floor. So I would teach the dogs and the pig to target their butts, their rear ends to the X, and they would stay there, and that would allow me to walk through with a bird or even into the enclosure, and I know I could leave the enclosure door open. I always shut it, but in case I forget to shut it, or I'm walking in with two birds or out with two birds.
You trained for that.
Yeah, I always
Yeah.
train for an accident because you never know when one's going to happen. So in here we have so many multiple species. We have 16 resident animals here, ranging from deaf and blind dog, ring-tailed lemurs, kookaburras. So when I give a visual or verbal cue, if I see an encounter getting ready to happen, I'll just say, everybody go to your station. Birds will fly up, dogs will sit, and then that's a way I can control an environment. I can control all the animals in an uncontrolled environment. I can get
Hmm.
control over my environment.
Very cool. I wonder if you probably have videos we could look at to look at some of that station training is just in the animal behavior center videos, right? Are a lot of those videos saved?
Oh yeah, on our Facebook
Okay.
page. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
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 Yep.
Okay. That would be cool. So basically, for years teaching classes and then with show dogs too, people will frequently say to me, well, how do I make him not do this? I don't want him to do this. And it's like, okay, that's great, you've identified what you don't like, so what do you want him to do? Well, I don't want him to jump on me. Okay, but what do you want him to do? Well, I just don't want him to jump, until I finally have to say, well, let's pick out what you want him to do, because people don't understand. And it's exactly what you're saying you do. It's not like wait for the dog to go into a bird enclosure and then start throwing cans of pennies at him, or whatever. It's like, no, I'm going to teach the dog what to do so the dog can make an appropriate choice, get rewarded for that. And then there's absolutely no reason not to do what you ask if you've trained it and they have an expectation and now they know what to do, right?
Right.
So it sounds like that is your philosophy too for for is just looking at what you want and training that instead of being upset about what you can't, what you want to get rid of. Because don't you think if you teach an alternate behavior, then the behavior you don't want is just going to melt away, right? It
Yeah.
can't keep happening.
I always tell people, in order to change a behavior, you need to replace it with another one. What would you like to replace it with? There's a million behaviors to replace it
Yeah.
with. And a lot of times I find that, say, for example, jumping, you know, people will be sitting there talking to me, and I was like, your dog's sitting, your dog's sitting, your dog is sitting, your dog's sitting. And they're like,
Right.
oh, good dog. And then I'm like, your dog's still sitting. And
I
then
know.
then they recognize the problem when the dog is no longer sitting because the reinforcer hasn't been delivered.
Right. Right. And I feel like as a species, we tend to not be conditioned to look for the good stuff. It's always like when you get ignored, if you're doing the right thing because you're not causing any problems. And then when you're, being rowdy or doing something wrong, that's when people tend to be like, we got to fix this, even though they have the good behavior and they could have just been reinforcing it, which would have fixed the other behavior, right?
Now you got to counter condition it.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Now you have to retrain it. And the concern, most people don't realize the importance of reinforcing desired behavior from the get-go. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? They use in the companion animal world, they usually
Yeah.
wait to seek advice when an undesired behavior is pretty well practiced. So then now you have to counter condition it, and the only concern with which we do a lot of counter conditioning here, because we do a lot of work with a lot of animals that have had time to learn undesired behaviors.
Right.
The concern with the counter conditioning is once the desired behavior is now trained and being reinforced. If you forget to reinforce on an intermittent schedule, the undesired behavior likely rears its head again, because it's like,
Yeah.
hey, lady, I'm sitting here doing the behavior that brought me the positive reinforcement, but you're busy talking on the phone or polishing your nails or whatever.
Yeah.
So then they revert back to the behavior, that the undesired behavior, but they revert back to it because it has a history of earning reinforcement. And that's usually
Right.
when the person's like, oh, here we go again.
Mhm.
It's usually
This
people.
didn't work.
Right, right, right.
Angela said, "Can you tell us some ideas for times when an animal isn't feeling hungry? I've had hard times rewarding in those moments." And I will tell you, Angela has a variety of animals. She actually has two dogs that I bred, two lion dogs I bred. But uh, they also have chickens, and she also has parrots and an aviary with some little birds and a whole bunch of reptiles too.
Okay. Yeah. We're always using I would say if I had about 45, and maybe even less than that, are we using food as reinforcers. We reinforce, especially if you're working with social animals, such as parrots, chickens, um, we
Dogs.
dogs. We will use tone of voice. Um, we'll use attention is a big reinforcer. Um,
Yeah.
so a lot of times, like here, we will talk back to a parrot, obviously. Uh, Parrots saying, or an animal is doing some kind of behavior we want to see increase, we'll talk back to it. And if it's not afraid of me, I will walk close to it. I will give head scratches. Particular areas like, you can temperature can be a reinforcer. We've used warm water as a reinforcer. Opportunity to play can be a reinforcer. A lot of times, because you're pairing yourself with the animal's positive reinforcers, the opportunity just to be with you is a positive reinforcer. We have animals here that will just work just to hear how good they are. We don't have to
Mhm.
touch them, we don't have to feed them anything, just for the opportunity to hear how good they are.
And so, I did before I go on, I just want to say too that it's like people need to remember that the way to determine if something is a reinforcer is what's happening to the behavior. If you're, patting your dog on the head every time he sits and the sitting goes away, he probably didn't find it a very reinforcing, reinforcer. It wasn't. It could have actually been punishment, and it's getting the behavior away. So you want to determine that the animal likes it. And of course, I think with birds, you can tell when they're coming up and asking for a scritch. But how do you feel like, I mean, so you agree with that, right? In order to find out if it's reinforcing, you got to measure it and see what happens with that behavior, right?
Yeah. In addition to observation in the first place and watching what the animal's moving towards, why, and why it's and what it's moving away from, why,
Okay.
you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, what you said in addition to just observing.
Right. Watching the animal and just seeing, yeah, if they're moving towards it, if they're asking for it, or if they're moving away. That is such a good thing to do. And I think it's I try and do it with all animals, but I think with birds you have to, because if you're not watching and aware and asking, I think you'll get bit a lot more often than with a dog usually, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. And like, because we do have a lot of professional dog trainers, because we do have like workshops here, workshops at the zoo.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of people, like dog trainers, will come here if they're not used to working with prey animals, and I'll just say, slow down and introduce yourself. Because a lot of
Yeah.
dog trainers want to do rates of reinforcement. And I'll just say, slow down. You've got to introduce yourself to this animal first. Um,
Oh, that's interesting.
yeah. So, yeah. Anyways, I was just going to tell you an example of a baboon that I'm working with.
Yeah. Tell me. Tell me.
And it is so cool to see, Vicki. So cool to see. I mean, the primary reason I do what I do is because I like to empower animals. I like to focus on exotics for numerous different reasons. And One is their choices are usually limited because they're in enclosures.
Yeah.
So I like to give them, add more choice to their enclosure. And studies show if you're actually using positive reinforcement, it's the animal's preferred form of enrichment. This baboon, we just had a zoo workshop in September, I believe, and there was 6 of us, and I was like, "Here's a baboon," and this baboon, um, we just walked in to see how it would react to all of us, and he did some eye contact and started looking back, and his behavior just he scared everybody. And I asked everybody, I was like, "Okay, we need to get behavior under control here because obviously he's acting like this for a reason." And I said, "If you guys are comfortable, we'll leave the room." And almost everybody said, "Get us out of here." So I went back in and live streaming my work with him. And a lot of times, like I'll just stand there and I'll throw. If I don't have a relationship with the animal, a lot of times I have to start with food because I don't have anything else to start with. I have
Right.
no value to this animal. And this baboon was doing backflips off of his enclosure bars and shaking his enclosure. Um,
Yee.
yeah, and you knew if those cage bars were not there, your life was in trouble.
Yeah.
So, and I always train animals with the intention if I ever find myself without cage bars being between us, because I have found myself in that situation. And I've always been like, thank God I've had this awesome form of communication with this animal through using positive reinforcement applied behavior analysis. So I went back and started training that baboon. And our relationship has just skyrocketed. And I just sat there first and I was just tossing Cheerios into his enclosure and just pairing that with myself, not doing
Mhm.
anything other than just toss it over here, short, sweet, walk away, and then watch. I didn't know a lot about baboon behavior, so I didn't know what this meant. I didn't know what, you know, usually they show your teeth. I'm like, cool, dude, I'm out. But it ended up being to the point where I could sit down in front of the baboon. I wanted to train to trim his nails. How am I going to get that? I love target training. It's target training is so much that people often don't look for. So he didn't like to necessarily touch people. So we put on the glove. I put on the gloves, put a Cheerio in my hand, and would have him reach through and grab it. And then I would start going like this, Cheerio there. So he had to reach through, put his hand in my hands,
So
grab it.
we had to make it flatter, like.
He had
Mhm.
to, yeah. So I don't know how to do that, but his hand had to go in between my 2 hands, and he
Okay.
didn't wanna be touched. So I would do this. I would start off like this, and then I'd slowly put my hand over and over the Cheerio, and then I stopped putting the Cheerio, and he would lift my hand, put his hand in between, then I would bridge, deliver the reinforcer. So he was doing this, and then I just removed the top hand, then I got a hand target, and then I started with the, you know, flicking his fingernails, getting him ready for that snip. And so now,
Yeah.
I mean, that's where it's at now. And when he sees me pull the chair up, he runs to his station and he just sits there and waits. And he's like, want this hand? Want this hand? What do you want me to do?
Yeah. I
Great.
think that's so cool. And I think that even in dogs, and I've been guilty of this, but I've really been working on it, is that we tend to think, like, I remember this one dog in a workshop and it was a Labrador. So it's like, oh, it's Larry Labrador. Like, I can, he'll want to work with me. And he did. But, I think I took the lead so cavalierly that he was kind of like, well, my mom, like we don't always spend enough time to build a relationship with an animal, and we expect them then to start wanting to work with us. And I think one thing that has always bothered me a lot with birds is that people will get a new bird, or even I was in a shop one time meeting a bird I was going to potentially adopt, and I had brought some treats and I was kind of working with her, and I went to scritch the top of her head and she kind of went like that. And the owner of the shop was like, well, don't act like you're afraid of her, just pet her. And it's like, but I'm thinking of adopting her and she doesn't want that right now. Like I don't, why would a pet from me mean anything? She doesn't even know me. So I think sometimes people are like, oh, he steps up so great, and then they pet him for a reward, and it's like right after they get the bird, And it's like, well, yeah, but it's because he's just sort of shell shocked. That's going to go away. I think it's great that the exotic piece makes you probably more aware of needing to build a rapport with an animal before you just jump into like trying to get him to do all this stuff, right?
Yeah, a lot of the animals, I mean, you walk into our lemur enclosure, that animal does not know you. They definitely know the difference between people. You're going to get a completely different behavior, and I'm not going to let you walk in and do that anyways, because I respect those animals. They're in enclosures. They have less choice, opportunity to get away from you. And I'm not going to have you untrain everything I've trained, because
Yeah.
it
Or
will.
get yourself killed if you go in there and do something stupid. I
Yeah.
want to share this comment from Angie. She said, I feel like with dogs, to reward this way, we have to set our own egos down and be open to not having the goal we think we want. I love that.
I like that too. I love that
Because
too.
it's so true. It's like, I mean, sometimes we just go in there, oops, oopsie, I didn't mean to do that. um, because I think that, you know,
Don't walk in with
we want
expectations.
what we want, or it's like, I want this dog to do this. And a big problem in the conformation world is that there are, you know, most of the information people get in this world, and this is why it's taking time for Show Dog Prep School to build up momentum, is that everything in conformation is based on tradition. People, they learn what they learn from their mentors, and their mentors learn what they learn from their mentors, and they do what works. And if they've done things that cause them to win, then they have this huge reinforcement history for whatever it is they've been doing, right? So, it's taken a long time to get people to be like, maybe there's a different way, or maybe there's something that can make more sense to the animal. Even if you get what you want, I feel like we owe it to the animals to do it in a way that's as enjoyable as possible. Um,
Yeah.
for the animal too. So Maggie said, I've had one of my dog trainer friends work with my birds, and he got to see how the bird's behavior is. I think that that's amazing. I think it's really good for people to work with other species. Even if you've got a cat. I mean, you have a cat. I do videos, and my cat does go outside, and um, he's always coming over and crawling all over the dogs and the table when I'm trying to train in the front yard. But one time I was telling someone, okay, well, I'm gonna call the cat over here so I can work with him. And I called my cat, and he did this beautiful recall. And everyone's like, how does your cat just come when you call him? And it's called, I've paired it with a half a can of cat food for the last 5 years. If I say, Lemmy, come here, hurry up, he's going to come home and hurry up because he's going to get reinforced for that. Okay, so Barbara said, I'm not certain why we should expect animals to automatically want to work with us when we aren't necessarily automatically comfortable to work with a stranger ourselves. Totally.
Probably,
Absolutely.
I think a lot of that is because it's how we're brought up, or our history of training.
Yeah. Yeah. And how we learn is the strongest with us, right? Like, it's so hard to unlearn what you've been doing for a period of time, that to say, I used to always do it this way, and that's the way I used to do it. This is my dog. I'm going to tell you what to do. You're going to do it, and there's going to be a consequence you don't like if you don't do that, you know? But that is so different now, because now I train in a way that I don't want the animals to do it because they're worried of what I'm going to do to them. And when you pull it apart, that's really what it is.
It's like how, tell me you haven't heard this when you're growing up and your parents tell you to do something. You're like, why? And they say, because I said so.
Yeah.
You better give me something a little bit better than
Yeah.
that.
Exactly.
'Cause,
Exactly. Um,
Skinner said,
okay.
you know, coercion is the main form of behavior control today, and it is.
Yeah.
So,
I wish that would go away. Okay, Diane said, have taken my parrots to dog classes to show them non-confrontational teaching, have also had my reactive dog students work with chimps and wolves. Wow, that's pretty cool. Yeah, light bulb moments for sure. When an animal can kill you, I think you get respectful very fast,
yeah,
you know?
you want to force an animal. A lot of the animals I work with, you want to force them to do something. You probably can once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're dangerous. Okay, we're gonna talk about case studies in a second, but first, I have a couple things I want to say. Um, the first one was when we were talking about reinforcers. The first workshop I came to see you at was the one that was in Tiburon that Connie English
Yeah,
did,
yeah.
and you worked with an umbrella, I think, and it's like you found that the strongest reinforcer, besides tossing him that wood block, was when everybody applauded. So
Well,
it's like he didn't want food; he wanted everybody to cheer,
right.
right?
Well, and
And
this was out in San Francisco,
yeah,
and we had a couple of bird candidates, and I told the people, or I asked the people that were caretakers of the birds, I said, please don't feed them. I will feed them during my training sessions because otherwise I have nothing to work with. And
yeah,
I was sitting there giving my presentation, watching the bird on a guy's shoulder, and he's sitting there feeding. I was like, oh.
dude, don't.
So I had to quickly identify. I'm sitting there talking, trying to think, what else is this bird going to work for? Because food is no longer going to be it. So I just noticed that something had happened, like when I was giving that presentation, when we all laughed, I looked over at the bird and the bird's like, hey, and I was just like, okay, I'm sitting here
Yeah,
identifying reinforcers. But that was a cool example.
so good. Sucks so bad that we don't have that on tape
We do have
because
it on tape.
oh, do you?
Hmm.
Because I do find with even with some dogs, I mean, you can really, get pretty far with cheerleading. So I want to talk to you about a couple case studies. We talked a little about Rocky. Um, so Rocky is sort of the mascot, right, of the Animal Behavior Center, and he was slated to be euthanized.
He was, yep, and he was in
Um,
national commercials this past January.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
So the first time that I came there and I was going to work with Rocky, he was on a bird stand. And, so this was like, I hadn't worked with a bird who knew how to learn that well yet. And I'm picking treats apart, preparing, and you're like, you better hurry. He's going. You better hurry. He's going. And it's like, I was just getting my treats ready. And he had already crawled off his stand and ran across the room and went into a bin full of toys and was just throwing out pieces of wood. It was like so funny, but it's true. Like he knew how to learn. He didn't need any, yeah, let me sit here and talk to you and give you a couple. He's like, dude, I know this show. So you better be ready or get out of here.
Oh, Rocky. I love him.
So you taught Rocky to not be well, you worked on his screaming. He can be held and managed and worked with all sorts of people. This was a bird that was medicated, wings clipped, and about to be put down, right?
Mhm.
So I know it was a big process, but so how did that work? You just started working on the screaming and reinforcing not screaming.
How did that work? I'm like, how long do we have? Well, and here's the thing about when people say, "Oh, the animal doesn't like me." What does that look like? Tell me what that looks like because Rocky would chase me across the room. He actually targeted his beak to my skin a couple of times, so I know what that looks like. um, but yet, um, when I would walk out of the room, he would scream. When I would walk back into the room, he wouldn't scream. I walk out of the room, he'd scream. Okay. So if you want to use the terminology, he doesn't like me, but then why is he stop screaming when I come back in the room?
Hmm. And
Um,
how do you quantify not liking you? There's no way to measure, you know? It's just another label, right? He doesn't like me. But it's like, what is he doing so that we can have something we can see, that we can have something we can measure, right?
Using observable, measurable behavior. Yeah. Yeah. So um, a lot of times, like with an animal like Rocky, I don't get an animal out of an enclosure until I know how I'm gonna get him back in without the use of force. Because otherwise,
Right.
if you bring him out and do all this beautiful work, and then you have to sack them and throw them back in the cage, repairing all that stuff with you. So a lot of times, like any animal, but with Rocky, it was a lot of inside the cage. I was working with him inside the cage for 3 weeks before I even got him out. But before I got him out, I still couldn't touch him. I would lure him back in the cage so I didn't have to use an aversive to get him back in the cage.
Okay.
And just, I mean, he learned a new way to communicate. You don't have to target your beak to my hand to communicate that you don't like something.
Mm-hmm.
So we taught that when Rocky's a big bird. When he's on my arm, his head's up here. So this, and I used contingencies. He did that to me once, and I was like, I don't know what that means, but I will back away from whatever's in the environment. And then the next time he did that, I was just like, okay, that happened a second time. So I backed away from whatever's in the environment. So there's one of your 4 main factors in reinforcer effectiveness is contingency. If this, then I'll back away from everything.
Right.
So he didn't have to
And
use.
that was just like in dogs, we would call it a muzzle punch, but it was a closed beak bop with no bite, right?
Yep, just a boop.
Which was a nice little thing to start looking at as a warning signal, right? That you could change your behavior or something in the environment before he has to escalate.
Yep, I'd much rather have that than a bite. It's just a
Yeah,
cue to me. It's a form of communication to me. He's not comfortable with something, or he's frustrated, meaning he's seeing something that he wants and he can't get to. It's usually he's not
exactly.
comfortable with something.
And that's a really great place to see how it ties in with show dogs, because with show dogs, a lot of the times it's like, well, this dog leaned away in the show ring, he didn't like it, so let's tell him he needs to do it. And it's like, well, if he's leaning away, he's saying he doesn't like it. So my training plan would be, let's pull back, not put him in that situation, work with him, desensitize him, counter condition so that he does like it, and then once we feel comfortable, then he can be okay with it. Because in my experience, if you ignore it, some dogs, if they're soft enough, will shut down and just say, fine, do what you want to me. They'll never be a fantastic show dog. They'll never be out there like, everyone look at me, everyone touch me, but they'll medal through a championship or something maybe, but they won't be a fabulous show dog. And I think a lot of that is because people are just like, no, he needs to do it. I told him to do it. But show dog, I mean, this is the only sport where it's like your job is to look fabulous and to own the ring and look like you're having a great time. And if you're slinking around avoiding people, that's
Being
not sexy for the show ring.
an empowered dog is sexy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and ones who just, it's like a lot of times we get to the point where I've worked with a lot of dogs where it's like they're never going to turn into just a dog who loves everybody to touch it. But we certainly get them to a point where they're like, oh yeah, I can do this. Not my favorite thing. I'd rather be, lure coursing, or doing something else. But this is okay because we spend the time giving them some communication skills. And as soon as I feel like we start letting them know that we hear them, like I hear you, then they are so much more like if the client's working the dog and I'm being the judge or something, the moment I start saying, I hear you, and backing away at the tiniest changes in their body language, they start becoming more comfortable, allowing me to do more. And
Be-
that's how it builds. And people go, oh my God, how are you doing this? And it's like, this is why this animal is learning that I am listening and I'm giving him the power to communicate. I'm not okay with that. So I
You're
could say, let me help you, dude. How can I make you be more comfortable? Right?
you're communicating with that animal and you can see that, and that is extremely powerful, and that is what brings a big smile to my face.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's really a big reinforcer for me. I want to show you what well, first I'm going to show you what Barbara said, which is she wants that on a t-shirt. An empowered dog is sexy. Oh, we can arrange that. I think we should do that. And then I wonder if I know Diane has adopted birds from best friends, and she
Mhm.
asked how Sunshine is doing. So she might know about Sunshine. You
Does
want to
know
tell a
about.
little bit about Sunshine?
Yep, she told me
Is
Sunshine.
he a permanent temper or is he still like maybe one day he'll get adopted?
I've been in touch with
Okay, that's what I thought.
I've been in touch with best friends over the past couple months. They're
About
yeah.
finalizing the paperwork.
No, I mean, because Sunshine came here for me to work with him, and
Yeah.
for me to give them this June, in the end of June, Sunshine will be here for a year.
Mm,
And I'll tell you, he's an amazing bird. I
yeah.
I I I communicate well with this bird. This bird, I can pet him. He lets me pet his head now. He lets me stick my fingers through the cage bars and pet his tail. Um, and I give him every opportunity to not do that. And
Uh-huh.
do you really want me to pet you, or are you just putting up with? No, Sunshine doesn't put up with anything. But he's a fabulous flyer. He flies all around the center on his own now. Um, he lets me trim his nails, and my fingers are in its protective contact. My fingers are right there, and he can bite my fingers at any time. And he just lets me sit there, trim his nails with Dremels. He stations while we enter the enclosure. Here's what I've noticed about Sunshine, and I've contacted best friends about this. I was just like, he wants to be with another bird.
Oh.
He wants to be housed with another bird. And if I took my selfishness out of this, because I told them he is welcome to stay here for the rest of his life. I get him, but his stress level gets really high when he sees me interact with a bird that he wants to be with, and it's super
Oh.
high. And I hate that when I see it. I mean, he rocks real fast, real fast.
Who does he wanna is it one of the cockatoos?
He
Did he
really wants to be with Rico, and
Oh.
he really gets upset if anybody goes in with Coco. He would probably get upset if oh, he does get upset when you interact with Suki.
Mhm.
Um, so if I want what's best for Sunshine, he needs to be housed with another bird and know that hands off, hands off. You know,
Yeah.
he's not going to let you get with that other bird. So I asked them, is has he always been attracted to other birds? And they said yes. So I was like,
Mhm.
if we want what's best for Sunshine, let's find some place where he can be housed with another bird and just be happy, just be a bird.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Otherwise,
great.
I mean, he gets to fly around here. He flies in the banana plants. He eats everything. He wants to be with Rico, and when I get Rico out, Sunshine turns into a very dangerous bird.
Mhm.
And by that I mean he will do everything in his power to get you out of that room, even if it's 10,000 square feet.
Mm.
He doesn't want you anywhere near. And he's probably a wild caught bird, but he would be a great bird for somebody. Well, what does great mean? Um, Another potential home for him would be with somebody that has no other birds that really knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
And are we going to find that? With somebody that really knows what they're doing, they're probably going to have other animals in their house.
Yeah,
You know what I
exactly.
mean? Because he was fabulous for me all the way home for Utah. I was training him in my bare feet in the hotel room. Um, he's fabulous for me when I have him out in the center by myself. I can sit down right next to him, and he can
Do you
sit up.
think there's a possibility that when he was there, he was having some frustration because he was developing the same thing with other birds there and never able to get to them, and nobody just could identify that? Or you can't help it. I mean, it's a rescue center.
Right. I mean, in the parrot garden at Best Friends, they do what they can and what they have to
Yeah.
do in a day. And
I mean, they've got a gorgeous setup for the birds. Their setup is amazing. But if you have a bird who isn't housed with other birds and feels like he wants to be, I'm sure that could create
I have
issues for him.
I have no doubt he wanted to be with other birds there. And I think he
Yeah.
said he wanted to be with Lollipop. I can't remember. But they said, yeah, they agreed. But
Okay.
they're on so many staff, and a lot of the people that visit there volunteer. You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we're talking about Sunshine. We've got his future being laid out, and
Good.
it's what's best for Sunshine.
Angie said, I adore your framing here. You aren't labeling it jealousy. You're saying he's upset. Yeah. I mean, because I think we can identify upset. You know, I think the problem with labels is that use labels sometimes. Like I'll use fear because if I don't say that I believe this behavior is fearful, then people are going to think the animal's being a jerk and he's just trying to be dominant or willful or in control. So I think it's important to point out because I feel like people are more empathetic to the animal if they realize that there's a fear component going on or something going on that worries them.
Sure.
And I just wanted to really quick, like when you were helping me with Ivan, my gray, it was like you had told me, and I really do take this like in all my training with birds, like if you don't feel 100% like you won't be bitten, don't do it.
Don't do
Right.
it.
So do you think, because I feel like I start all birds even if I know them with protected contact or just inside their cage, you know, even if I feel like I could just stick my hand in there, I think that we can do so much when we're not pushing all of our own touchy feely stuff all over the animal. And we don't do that with dogs. I mean, we really don't do that with dogs. You don't have to. But sometimes I feel like it would be beneficial if people had to train a dog where, let's say it was so dangerous you couldn't be in the room with it. You had to be on the other side of something. What do you think about that?
I say, come work with me at the zoo. I'll show
Yeah.
you.
So tell us about some of your, like we talked about, you were going to talk about a couple of case studies. So tell us about what you're doing with the giraffe and what you're doing about alligators. Because if you can do it with them, I'm sure we can do it with show dogs
Yeah.
without you. Or
Yeah. So I get really excited when I train fish and alligators because people, oh, it's so cool. People don't think, they're like, oh, but I hear this with birds too. What do you train a bird to do? And I was like, a lot. Come to me when called, touch a target,
yeah,
touch a nose target, go through a hoop, which is the same thing. I'll train alligators. A lot of things I train is husbandry behaviors, vet prep behaviors, because I want to take the stress. And when I have time, I can train tricks. And you told me this years ago. Tricks help fine tune your training.
yeah,
Like right
totally.
now, I've got the lemurs. All I have to do is I go like this, and they reach up like this, and I'm like, what am I gonna do with this behavior? But it's what am I gonna do? But they were just, what do you want me to do? And I was like, I don't
Yeah,
know. So with the alligators, I teach. This is so really cool to see. What is really cool to see mean? It's really cool for me to see people line up behind me when I'm training the alligators, and not because I can get them to do what I want them to do, because it shows these people a new appreciation for an animal that says they just sit there, they don't do anything. So and I just talked about this the other day in Coffee with the Critters. I take a metal tongs and I tap 1, 2, 3 on metal wire, and you will see all these alligators. Like you're there, like, what's in this exhibit? I can't see. Grass is like this tall or whatever, or they're in their pond, and I'll just say, I'll show you. Watch this, and I wheel down in front of the gate, and I go 1, 2, 3, and then all of a sudden you just see 6 alligators stand up out of the grass. They just start moving, and it makes all the hair on my arm stand up, and I just want to cry, but then I'm going to look really strange. But you can hear all the oohs and the ahs coming from behind you. And then what I like to hear next is, how did you get them to do that?
yeah,
And it's a great educational opportunity for me to stand up and turn around and say, you can teach your dog at home to do this too.
yeah.
And your mom and your dad.
Right, right.
So, when they're in their winter exhibits, when they're off exhibit, that's when I fine tune my training to get them prepared for when they're on exhibit in the summer. So I would sit there right in front of them and 1, 2, 3, and boom, throw that piece of meat in their mouth. But I had to figure out, I was feeding them with metal tongs through the enclosure. So I had to figure out how to even feed them, because what was happening is they weren't necessarily looking where the food was. They were assuming and then just started biting. Well, those tongs hit them in the front of their mouth so many times that could be a positive punisher. So
Right.
I would take the tongs above their eyes like this on the side of their eyes and see when they move. And what I saw was when I went over here like this, they'd reach like this. So I would just sat in front of them and I'd go tap, 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 boom, right in the side of the mouth, and got it consistently, consistently. So this wasn't inversive of the food being delivered. Kind of the same thing
Right.
with my deaf and blind dog. You tell her, good, she'll start going like this for the food. But if she hits your hand, boom, it's a positive punisher and she cowers.
Yeah.
But so then I taught them all four on the floor, because they would climb to try to get food. And I was just like, that's not what I want happening when I'm out
Yeah.
in with you. So then we stationed all four on the floor. Elvis, you on the right, Priscilla, you on the left. Then we started getting them out and recall training them down the hallways. And then they know this when they're on exhibit in the summer. So they're laying in the pond or whatever, tap, 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 boom, here they come. Um,
So was this all done with protected contact?
yes,
You're behind a chain link or something?
yes. And this summer it's going to be not protective contact. There will be no chain link.
Wow.
Yeah, but
It's
go back,
funny. Remember
I was gonna say, to go
when
back on something you just said before we started talking about this. I never put myself in a situation where I'm gonna get hurt. And if I'm nervous, I do not do it, because what nervous means is that animal doesn't know exactly what you're getting ready to do. And if it has to defend itself, if it thinks it's being pushed past its comfort level, I'm not going there. If I feel
yeah,
any slight nervousness, it's because that animal doesn't know what I'm training well.
yeah,
Yeah. So don't do
exactly.
it.
Angie just said food delivery is a punisher. It's so hard for people to wrap their heads around that. That's interesting. Let me tell you a story about that. This was a consult I went to do with a very large dog that was, having some fear issues, but I mean, he had a lot of weird stuff, but nothing had come across as that he was dangerous or anything. And his head was about this big. I mean, he was just an enormous dog. And the woman went out of the room, and I was sitting on the couch, and the dog was sort of right behind me. And I went to give him a treat, and it rolled out of his mouth. And I picked it up, and I went to give it again, and he went, "Err," and he was right here.
Oh,
And the husband was in the room, and I said, "Please call Pam in here." And he goes, what happened? I go, just call her in here. And then he called her in the room, and she goes, what's going on? And I said, just grab your bag of treats and recall him to you. But I mean, I'm telling you that first him dropping it out of his mouth was, him saying, I don't want it. Who would have thought? And I found out he ended up years later being euthanized for aggressing on them. And it was always followed by a freeze. And I knew if I got up to move or did anything, it was going to set him off. So I was just like, call the dog, call the dog, call the dog. So yeah. And Angela said, food delivery as a punisher is so hard for dog people to wrap their heads around. And I think that is so true, because it's just like, oh, if I'm using cookies, you know, um, then I couldn't possibly be doing anything aversive. And it's like, no, if a dog's terrified and you're using food to lure him to it, that can be not a good thing for the dog. If you're, trying to force a dog to eat when they're nervous, and, when you're nervous, sometimes you're nauseous, it might actually be really, not good for them to be taking the food. So I think
well,
yeah, that's definitely something to think about.
and fearful dogs can be very dangerous animals. Well, what is
Absolutely.
dangerous if people don't understand?
Yeah, exactly. Um, oh, Diane said she thinks she remembers that story. I probably told you that. It's funny that we talked about the alligators, because when we taught at Best Friends a couple of years ago, remember they didn't know what animals I would be training there because I was doing
Yeah.
wild things. So they said, well, we'll take you on a ride and show you all the animals. And they had like this great Peking duck that was aggressive, that it's like, how are we going to do that with 10, you know, workshop attendees that are supposed to go in? Then there was a red-tailed hawk, and it's like, well, we're not going to get anything done. So when they took me to the tortoise enclosure, I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. And the keepers were like, this is what you want to train? I mean, they were like, why would you train a tortoise, and what would you train a tortoise to do? And we got in there and people were like, oh
People
my God, I love tortoises now. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Because it's like we taught them to target, we taught them to station, we taught a recall. Oh, that was kind of not nice. Let's see if I can delete that. Um, yeah, it was interesting though that even their own keepers were like, that's what you want to train? Like that, like just because they were tortoises, like why would that's not fun, but like they're really fun to train. They're super cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I like to train things like vultures, alligators, fish. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
That
for
people
sure.
don't think can be trained.
Exactly.
It gives you a new appreciation for the species.
Right. And there are people, I mean, when the first time I worked with tortoises was at a zoo, and most of the people that worked at the zoo, they believed very strongly you cannot train these animals. You just cannot train these animals.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was I mean, and then all you can do is train them and then hope that they'll recognize that it's like all animals can be trained.
Yeah, yeah. And I've been asked a lot of times, has there ever been an animal that you could not train? And I would say no, but because they're always learning, there's been times where I've had to relax my criteria and say things like, "Ooh, we're not there yet," or
Yeah.
we have a lot more work to do before we can get there. And there's even been times where I've just said, you know what? The proximity to this animal or the tactile interaction with this animal is too stressful. Let's have this be exhibit only animal, off contact training. I need you
Uh-huh.
here. I need you over here. You can get him to go into a crate without interaction.
And that's when you were saying that somebody said, sorry, we got some like sort of um vulgar comments, so I'm just relating them.
I was
Somebody's
gonna
just
say,
being
you can just ignore the comments and delete them when we're done.
yeah. Um, when you were talking about the alligators, and it's like, well, what would you want to train them to do? And it's like, maybe not kill you when you go in there, maybe to go over and go to a station. I mean, I could think of a million things that I want to train if I was working with alligators,
Sure.
you know?
You can train them to be still for a veterinary exam while we, go under the armpit, lift the
Yeah.
tail. Um, I like working really close with veterinarians, especially at zoos, to say in the zoo vet does just say, ask Laura to teach the baboon to open his mouth on cue. Ask Laura to get the alligators accepting a noose around their mouth, you know?
Hmm.
Um, but sometimes you don't even have to put that around their mouth. You can train them to stay still for the veterinary exam.
Yeah, that's really cool. So real quick, thank you so much for being here, but I want you to just run through the memberships again at the Animal Behavior Center.
Sure. We have our level one membership, and I can tell you the prices. I mean, they're level one's $149 for the year, the whole year. All our memberships and projects consist of live streamed monthly Q&As, activities, videos, video review. Um, Level one's for companion animals. Level two is for people serious about the field of applied animal behavior and wanting to see how it works on every different animal. We have monthly business meetings. Online consultations are of no charge. We have different topics. We focus on a lot of different things, and it consists of live streams of numerous different animals. Then we have things like the Parrot Project. It's an annual, that's $199 for the year. We have a lot of dog trainers in the Parrot Project that have parrots as well.
Mhm.
That said that it's one of the biggest bangs for their buck for what, because
Yeah.
art is in it. We have the Pig Project, same thing, Q&As, Deaf Dog Project, Q&As.
Is the pig project still happening?
Right now, the pig, yeah, they're still there. The Pig Project and the Deaf Dog Project are currently archived, meaning there's 2 or 3 years of video library in there.
Oh, nice.
Yep, yep. So then I just get them in level 1 so they can listen to the podcast. We have our podcast get a lot of great reviews. Thanks,
Mhm.
man.
Maggie just said the Parrot Project is great, and I agree. That's my favorite one.
Thanks, thanks. And they're meant to be combined. So you can join the Parrot Project in level 1 at the same time. So people can get the podcasts in level 1. But yeah, and in addition to that, we have our services we have here where people fly in. We got a zoo workshop coming up in a couple months that might be pushed off to a little bit of a later date.
Yeah, yeah, we'll see.
Um, yeah, but we have different workshops here as well.
And then also just on the animal behavior Facebook page, you do Coffee with the Critters. That's free of charge. There's always all kinds of little training videos and snippets and stuff on there that could be helpful too.
Yeah, Coffee with the Critters. Usually, when people start watching Coffee with the Critters, they start purchasing after they watch me for a while, and I like them. I want them to understand how I work, because in Coffee with the Critters is usually every Sunday morning at 9 a.m. I live stream training or a guest or Q&A, so they can see my approach and why I do it.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for being here. I miss you so bad.
I know. I was
This was
thinking
really good.
when all of this is over with, maybe we do that retreat that we were talking about.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
All right.
It's
So you guys, animalbehaviorcenter.com, and then also the Animal Behavior Center on Facebook. Look her up.
Yeah.
That's my buddy.
Yeah. Thanks, Vicki.
Thanks, Laura.
You're
Good to
welcome.
see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.